Well, hello, Kate. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. And why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners today?
Thank you, Nina. My name is Kate Accetti. I am the Senior Sales and Account Manager here at Interprenet, and I focus primarily on the judicial market, so courts and any court entities that require language services.
Can you tell us a little bit more about which of the language solutions that Interprenet offers are often requested by US courts?
So, courts in the US might have a gambit of language solutions that require support, but what we most often see is interpretation. So, oral interpreters that help a limited English proficient or deaf or hard of hearing person within a court setting. So, typically that's on-site or remote consecutive interpretation, where an interpreter is either in person with the limited English proficient or deaf party, or joining remotely via a virtual platform. And they're interpreting either via spoken language or via sign language.
And what are some of the common use cases for courts when it comes to language services? Is it always in a trial, or are there other use cases that courts come to us and need the services that you just described?
So we have everything from pre-trial services where we might have support for an attorney or court personnel if a person is incarcerated before they actually go before a judge. They have administrative hearings. Trials are interesting because trials typically require two interpreters with simultaneous interpretation, meaning communication in real time. What we see with trials most typically is in-person interpreters, and there's a team of two. It usually runs for a half day or a full day, and they use headset equipment. So usually a portable transmitter and receivers for those that require it. And then for the court, when they're addressing the court or the judge, the interpreters will, speak in English for the non-English speaker. For example, if it's a Spanish speaker and they're replying to the court or testifying, the interpreter will then interpret for the entire court into English. But that's one example where we're not seeing consecutive interpretation.
And what are some of the common languages that we interpret for? I would assume in the US it's probably Spanish, but are there any other languages that we typically see that we can fulfill? How many can we fulfill?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because it does vary state by state, region by region. So, for example, in the state of Illinois, where Interprenet is based, probably the most common languages aside from Spanish would be Arabic, Polish, Russian. We see a lot of Mandarin, but it varies by location, region by region, county by county. Where we see an influx of non-English speakers could depend on the region of industry. So, for example, in certain areas, you have a large Khmer speaking population. You can see, instances of people that speak Thai, it just depends on where you are. But across the state, it's really interesting. And then even throughout other states, I've worked very heavily in Delaware, the state of New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Florida, Texas. In Texas, we see a huge population of Spanish, obviously, but people would be surprised there's a large Vietnamese population as well. So it varies.
And what makes court-certified interpreters unique? Because they do have different certifications than your typical interpreter, let's say.
Sure. So within the U.S. court system, there are federally certified interpreters, which is only available in two languages. It used to be three, but it's Spanish and Navajo. Used to have Haitian Creole as an available language, but it's no longer being tested. Then at the state level, you can become a state certified interpreter with your local association of the courts. And that could be for any language. So it depends, but it's a three-step testing process for anyone to become a court certified interpreter. So there's the written examination, which tests their knowledge of court proceedings, ethics, boundaries within the court vocabulary, and general understanding of the setting. There is also an oral examination, whereby interpreters are tested both in consecutive and simultaneous interpretation skills, and sight translation, which is where they see a written document and do basically a translation of that on-site of the target language. So they might have something, a short 1 or 2 sentences that's written in English, and they need to sight translate that and write it down in their target language. The third part is a proficiency evaluation, whereby the candidate will be graded or have an official grade of their proficiency in English and their secondary language or primary language. So that is the 3-part test for the AOC.
And each interpreter has typically, of course, their language that they interpret into, but are they also tested in the two-way interpretation back into English then?
Yeah, they would have that as part of the testing period. So they're tested on consecutive interpretation, and the proficiency evaluation will evaluate both English and target language skills. It's very demanding, and they have to show a level of proficiency. Now, depending upon the state, they might have different nomenclature. So, for example, in the state of New Jersey, you have master level interpreter, a journeyman, or conditionally approved. In the state of Illinois, it follows the same logic, but they have different names for it. So you might be certified versus qualified, and there are different things that you might test into to be an approved interpreter. So, for example, you might be approved to do more administrative tasks, but may not be approved to do a trial. So it's interesting, but every state is different. Certain languages are not tested. So there are languages of lesser diffusion, or LLDs, that are not tested for the state certification, which is administered by the AOIC, or the AOC, excuse me.
And what is the AOC?
Association of the Courts. So each state has one, with the exception of the state of Kansas does not test for that. So they use the consortium, which is any neighboring state that has certified interpreters within the state.
And tell us a little bit about, you mentioned earlier that Interprenet offers the on-site interpretation services, which means the interpreter is on-site physically. And then we also offer remote interpretation services, which means the interpreter is coming in remotely through an app or virtual meeting platform, I assume. Can you explain the difference a little bit more? And when is it typical to have an interpreter on site, and when it's typical, or when it's good to have the remote option?
Sure. So there might be many different reasons why somebody would request an in-person interpreter. For example, with an elderly person, someone who is non-English speaking and hard of hearing, it might be challenging for them to navigate a virtual platform. But using a virtual platform helps to, one, expand the pool of interpreters, so we don't need to use local resources, as well as timing, right? So interpreters don't need to physically drive and arrive to a court and move courtroom to courtroom. They can hop from one meeting to the next via a virtual platform, and that could be anyone. So Interprenet is tech agnostic in the sense that it doesn't matter what virtual platform you're on, we can support it. So we support courts on WebEx, on Zoom, on MS Teams, but there are, again, many different reasons why a court might want an in-person interpreter. For example, having a CDI team might be prohibitive via virtual platform. A CDI team is a certified deaf interpreter team in which one hearing ASL interpreter works in tandem with a certified deaf interpreter. So the interpreter is actually deaf and helps to convey communication to a deaf or hard of hearing person. And that could be for a number of reasons. It might be that they have some cognitive issues, if it's for a trial, if there are specific terminologies or things that need to be conveyed and expressed that would not be done effectively with just the use of a hearing interpreter, because there are nuances that might be missed. But again, there are many different reasons why a court would potentially request in person. It could be their own technology limitations, right? So it could be that the courtroom itself is not equipped to handle the sound incoming and then cannot capture the official record, because that's something they have to consider as well with a virtual platform.
Can you maybe go a little bit deeper into some of the challenges courts face when it comes to language barriers? I think, in general, the regular person would probably not even think about that that's an issue. And what happens if somebody is scheduled for a pre-trial or some other instance and they suddenly need interpretation urgently? What typically happens when a court doesn't have an interpreter available? How do they overcome this language barrier, and how quickly can an interpreter be available?
Courts that are operating under best practices and following the guidelines as deemed by Title VI and the Americans with Disabilities Act should be obtaining professional, unbiased third-party interpreters, right? People who have been trained, they understand technology, they understand the terminology of the courts. They also, can remain impartial, and they follow the canon of standards for a professional interpreter. The reason that a person might really require interpretation services is because, let's face it, even for English speakers, going into the court system is an intimidating thing. We might not know the protocol, we might not know what to expect, we may not know our rights. And if you compound that with maybe a cultural challenge, a language barrier, we might not be giving access to justice that everybody's entitled to within this country if we're not providing the right accommodations. So it's really important for us to ensure that people who are going through the court system, have proceedings, if they have a hearing or a trial or they need to file an order of protection, something, that they have access, they fully understand their rights, they fully understand the procedures and what their next steps are going to be, and that they have, if they have any questions, that they're able to get those answered and that they can understand that within their own language and within their own register or level of understanding. I think it's really important for, courts or anybody that's watching this to know that if you have, if you speak English as a second language and you're going within the court system, you have the right to request accommodations and to request support. And for any court personnel, judges, even attorneys working within the courts, it's really important for us to be able to provide that for any person who, has a court proceeding, that they gain access through professional interpreter services, that we're not using friends, family, even children. I've seen children interpret for people within court or legal settings, and it's not a reasonable accommodation. It's not acceptable, and it quite frankly can be dangerous and can cause people challenges. We've had lawsuits and people, cases of death, many different things where it's really a risk for people to not be compliant with that.
And it's actually a really good setup in terms of having somebody who can offer certified interpreters across the US, depending where you are. Maybe we can just talk about our translation services. So Interprenet also offers translation services, not just interpretation. Translation is the translating of text, of written text. How do courts take advantage of any text or document translation services that we offer?
I just completed a couple of translations for some court systems this week. We can translate any document or flyer or any content that might be public facing, right? So for example, flyers, information about specific procedures or things that people have questions about, right? Or even something simple as like a little sign that says, to access interpretation, go to this kiosk, right? So it could be anything. It could be information on a website. A lot of counties or court systems have information available in their most frequently requested languages or the languages within that specific area, right? So you might have information about somebody's rights available in multiple different languages. Two, in addition to translation services, but more on the written text modality, we also offer live captions. So CART, Communication Access Real-Time Translation. That's available in court for the deaf and hard of hearing. We see that for some parties who are deaf or hard of hearing or just require additional assistance, may not be proficient in American Sign Language or any other form of sign language, or people who become deaf later in life utilize CART quite a lot. So they're the provider, the captioner, is capturing the record and providing it in a way, usually it's broadcast in a screen or on a laptop, for somebody to be able to see visually what's happening within the court and what's being spoken. And they have the option to either voice for themselves or to type their response back to the court if they don't voice for themselves. So that's another service that's provided for the deaf and hard of hearing outside of American Sign Language.